It's like, oh, sounds like a commending. It's like, oh yeah, this evil, this corrupt steward. It's like, oh yeah, good job, way to do that. Although we need to remember when we're thinking about that Jesus is telling a parable. He's wanting to teach a message. He's not commending the steward. As a matter of fact, he doesn't commend the steward. He says, oh, the property owner is the one who said, oh, that was very clever of you, corrupt steward, for what you did. That was pretty clever of you. He's not really commending him. He's not saying, oh, that was a good job, but he is saying that was clever. So there was the part there, that you're clever. So what is Jesus trying to say? We need to back up a little bit and think about this. This was Luke chapter 16. Now, we didn't hear this because last week we celebrated the exaltation of the Holy Cross. But if we had heard the readings for week 24 in ordinary time of year C last week, we would have heard Jesus say, we would have heard in the gospel that the scribes and Pharisees were complaining and mumbling about Jesus, that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors. And he proceeded to tell 3 parables in response to their grumbling. One about a lost sheep, one about a lost coin, and one about a lost son who came home and his father welcomed him and his brother was annoyed, the prodigal son. So he's working his way through, and now we're continuing on through those parables. There's another parable. Essentially the message is, it's like, you can search, welcome, even struggle with that welcoming, but now you need to also determine, how am I going to live my life? Am I going to live my life as a child of the world, which is what they're saying about this steward? He obviously was functioning in the world and very clever in his managing, how do I live in this world? And am I going to give up some of the master's rights, some of his wealth, just to take care of myself? It's not mine to give, but I'm going to do that anyways. Or are we going to live in the light, as children of the light? So that's part of what Jesus is trying to say to us today, and he wants to get the Pharisees and the scribes to understand that as well. Now, if we were to go just a couple of verses past what we hear in our gospel passage today, we'll hear that Jesus says to the scribes and the Pharisees that you need to give up your possessions, and I really want your hearts. He's like, I want your hearts. I want your hearts turned to me. And if we actually go back 3 weeks, a little bit further in Luke's gospel, he says, we need to give up all our possessions if we're going to follow Jesus. So he says that, and then we get into these parables, and we finally come to this one. It's kind of coming to an end of these parables where he says, I want your heart. I want your heart. And he's trying to use these parables to teach us, how it can go wrong. In this case, here's the steward. It's like, whoa. It's like, you're showing that you can't be trusted. Well, I'm not going to trust you with anything. You're fired. It's like, so it's like, we need to think of, how do I remain trusted? And how do I care for other people? It's that whole concept of, don't be worried about mammon, our worldly possessions, our wealth and worldly possessions. Be worried about giving our hearts to God. And Amos tells us that too. As a matter of fact, in that reading from Amos we hear this, you who trample upon the needy and destroy the poor of the land and conspire to cheat the poor. Never will I forget a thing you have done. So it's Amos in our first reading today. It's like repeating what God is saying. It's like, let's pay attention, and you make sure you're treating people fairly. Amos is talking about how they wanted to set their scales for cheating and buying someone for a pair of sandals. It's like, no, that's not where we should be. And that's part of that message of, don't be concerned about the wealth of this world. And we say, well, we're not cheating the poor. We're not treating them badly. Maybe not. But we live in a culture that does. We have, in various places around the country, we have farm workers who are not really well paid, and some of them are probably paid below minimum wage, and they're also covered with all kinds of chemicals. It's like, wow, is that right? Is that really where we should be? So we want to think about that aspect of, hey, we're benefiting from that. We go to the grocery store and buy food. It's like, we're benefiting from that. And we also have a culture that tells people that they're entitled and that, oh, you should be able to have this and that. And, well, the reality is that you can't have everything. It's like, there used to be television shows. I don't know if they still are. I don't watch television anymore. But, you would always see all these people on a television show living in a big house with, lots of wealth and fancy cars and so on. It's like, no, that's not true for all of us. That's not true for everybody. It's not true for even a small minority. So that implication of you're entitled to this causes a loss of sense of what you really have and what you should be getting. And as a result, because you can't fulfill what that sense of entitlement, there's depression. And there's a desperate challenge to try and fill that missing thing in your life with things that are not God. So we want to say, how do I help, one, me to fill my life with God, but also help my neighbor, people I come in contact with, to fill their life with God as well, rather than worry about, oh, can I win the lottery? Or, hi, how do I scam somebody out of something? Various things like that. So we want to be giving our life to Christ. Now, I have two examples of radical giving of their lives to Christ. And I'll just walk through. These are a couple of people I knew 15 years ago. Actually, there's somebody here who knows one of those people. Young lady studied civil engineering. And then after she finished her degree, she worked for a year or so in that field and determined, I need to be doing something different. I'm going to enter an order. She became a nun. And after she, it's like 7 years or something like that before you take your perpetual vows. She said, here she was, did very well in college, studied to be a civil engineer, would have done very well in the world, and said, I need to do something else. I need to do something else. And made that choice. And then I knew another young lady who was in, actually the parish I was in New York for many years, and she had a full ride to Rensselaer Polytech, which is a fairly well-respected technical college. She had a full ride, full scholarship. She was there, and after several years, she was working on her PhD in microelectronics. So a brilliant woman. And she made the same decision. I need to do something else. She entered that same order. And eventually, she hadn't finished her PhD. She eventually took her perpetual vows, and the order said, all right, now go back and finish your PhD. So it's like, there you go. And now I think she is, teaches high school physics in various places in the country. It's like wherever the order sends her. But she had made that determination too. So there's two very brilliant young ladies who said, I need to do something else. I'm going to give my life to Christ. Now, each one of us is called to do something similar. Not as radical, but we're still called to give our lives to Christ. It's like, how do I do that? How do I reach out to my neighbor? How do I take care of my family so that all of my family comes to know who Jesus Christ is by my caring for them? How does my neighbor come to know that I love them and that Jesus Christ loves them also? That's what we're called to do. We're called to listen, say, God, what are you calling me to do? How are you calling me to put aside the wealth of the world, and we can have people who are wealthy. It's not a bad wealth, money itself is not a bad thing. It's when we get wound up and bound up in it that it's a problem. But it's like, I have it. Do I need it, or should I be giving it away? So there's that question we need to be asking God, how do you want me to manage these gifts that you've given me? So today, as you receive his body, blood, soul, and divinity in the Eucharist, ask him to help you to be open, to open your heart. Just as you hear a couple of verses further on in Luke's gospel, open your heart. He wants our hearts. Open your heart to listen to what he's calling you to do and how he's calling you to serve him, how he's calling you to serve him rather than our worldly possessions.